What's up, guys? I'm Ernie. I'm back with the Face Off Sports Network, and today we're going to touch on some RB sleepers. Let's jump right into it. So, first running back on my list, Jordan Mason. I am a big Jordan Mason fan. If you were following me last year at Fantasy Football Anonymous, you would have known that I was pounding the table for him as the top handcuff in all of fantasy football. And then that first half of the year looked like a pretty good investment. So, breaking down his numbers, last year there were only five running backs that had 150 carries and averaged over 5 yards per carry. That was Saquon Barkley, Jamari Gibbs, Bucky Irving, Derrick Henry, and my boy Jordan Mason. So that puts him in elite company, right? That just shows you like what he is capable of, where his talent is. And now going back the year prior in 2023 when he started getting some playing time behind CMC, he ranked third in rushing yards over expected per attempt, which was only behind Barkley and Derrick Henry. So, yeah, that's pretty good. He also earned a 93 PFF grade that year, which was the highest of any running back. Yeah, it was only a small sample size, but still, that's a really elite number. Of his 270 rushing yards that year, 190 came after contact. So his 4.22 yak ranked second in the league. So this is a very good player, very underrated player. I think if he didn't get hurt in the middle of last year, you would have saw him really take off. So what happened this year, the Vikings went ahead and they actually traded for Jordan Mason. Yeah, they gave some late picks and then they signed him to a 2-year, $10 million contract. Why I like that is because, yes, it's a very friendly contract, but it's nothing to sneeze at. Like, that's not backup money, in my opinion. So I think this is actually a very smart signing by Kevin O'Connell. I think he's one of the better offensive minds in the NFL. He's one of my favorite coaches. And I see what he's doing. He's taking, an elite workhorse running back and moving them from one zone scheme to his. And now you look at the Vikings, who made significant investments in their offensive line. You could even argue last year they had the better offensive line. So now, you have Jordan Mason. He's 25 years old. He has workhorse size. He's paired with this loaded Vikings offense, right? So he's projected to be the 1B to Aaron Jones's 1A. So this is why I really like Jordan Mason. Like, he's getting playing time. Yes, he's not like, getting a bell cow workload, right? But I think this is going to be more of a 50-50 split than people think. I think what O'Connell is thinking is he's going to have Jones be more of like his Gibbs. This is cheesy to use as an example. And I think, Jordan Mason is going to be his Montgomery. I think you're going to see Aaron Jones, cut up the field between the 20s, right? And then you're going to have Jordan Mason. He'll get that early down work and he'll also be their red zone running back. But again, this is, all about educated guesses and gambling. And, Aaron Jones is a great football player, but he's 31 years old and he's consistently dealing with injuries. So, there's a pretty high probability that he gets hurt this year. So, if he was to get hurt, now you kind of, just land into a fantasy treasure chest with Jordan Mason because he might, actually touch stardom. I think he would be a rock solid RB1 for the rest of the year. Now, moving on to our second player is Trey Benson. So, Trey Benson, he was one of my favorite running backs. Actually, he was my favorite running back last year. I did like him a little bit better than Jonathan Brooks, which is a sad story. Hopefully, Brooks recovers. But Benson went very high. He went at the top of round 3. And if you look at his numbers last year, so he was hidden behind my boy James Conner. Like, I love James Conner. He's such a physical running back. Just a great player. Also, helped me win a couple of fantasy leagues. So thank you for that, James. But when you look at Trey Benson's work from week 3 on last season, he was 5th in yards per attempt, 6th in yards after contact per attempt, and 7th in elusiveness. Those are pretty good numbers. So he outproduced guys like CMC, Jonathan Taylor, and Brian Robinson in fantasy points per touch. Here's the kicker. He's sharing a backfield with one of the most injury-prone players in the NFL, my boy James Conner. James Conner is an awesome player, but he's 31 years old with a history of injuries. So even in a timeshare, I think Benson still is going to have weekly value here. I think this year he's going to get more playing time. I think it'll be more of like closer to a 50-50 split, with James still getting the heavier side of the workload. But if James Conner was to ever go down, again, it's similar to Jordan Mason. Now you have a league winning running back. I think Benson could be a high and RB2 for the rest of the season. And again, there's that upside where he might just, demand more playing time just from the talent alone. This kid is a big running back. He runs a 4.3. There's a lot to like in Trey Benson's profile. He's a running back I would definitely invest in. Best ball late, zero RB strategies. Both of these guys, Mason and Benson, are going to be gold for you. And my last player I got for us today is Jaylen Wright. So this one's more interesting because obviously we know the star that Devin A-Chain is. He is an absolute fantasy stud. But there is really interesting upside here. So I think both could be producing for fantasy purposes this year, similar to Mostert and A-Chain 2 years ago. I think Wright was drafted with the vision to take over Raheem's role. And the one flaw with this backfield is it's linked to Tua's health, right? And we all know the unfortunate story about Tua, but he's playing right now. There's a lot of positive reports, so all arrows are pointing up, right? But this was evident, when you use 2023 and 2024 as a sample. What I mean by that was in 2023, the Dolphins running backs were both elite. They were producing elite like production. So, Mostert and A-Chain, you could have started both of them and you would have still been fine. So elite production from the running backs when Tua plays a whole healthy season. But in 2024, when Tua got hurt, A-Chain averaged 7.3 fantasy points per game. But if you average out the rest of the games, if you take those four games out and you average out the rest of the year, he averages basically 21 fantasy points per game. So this is what I'm saying. Their upside really does depend on Tua. So in 2023, Raheem Mostert scored 268 PPR fantasy points. So I'm not saying Jaylen Wright is going to replicate that completely, but he is going to take that role, and his opportunities are going to go up this year. I think what we could see here is they could potentially form a very solid 1-2 punch, similar to what we saw with A-Chain and Mostert in 2023. And let's not forget, when you go back to last year, the Dolphins traded back up into the fourth round to get Jaylen Wright. And they gave up like pretty good draft capital that a lot of people felt they couldn't afford to do, especially when it was for a running back. And you could make an argument that their running back room is pretty set. So it had some people, scratching their heads. But I think McDaniels is a very good offensive mind, right? And I think he saw something in Jaylen Wright. So why were they so eager to get him? But once you put on the tape, and you see the 4.3 speed and the explosiveness, it just jumps off the screen. I think McDaniel saw Mostert's future replacement. I think that's why they made that investment. I think the running back room is that important to them and their success. And while A-Chain, is incredibly talented, he's not the biggest back, and he's already kind of dealt with some injuries. I'm not saying he's an injury-prone player, but, he's not NFL size. So, this guy, and you could say this with any person, I just think the probability of a guy like Devin A-Chain getting hurt is higher than, a guy that's, 220 pounds and the same height as him. So the risk of injury is always going to be there. Wright gives them basically another home run hitter. And that could easily step into that starting role if A-Chain was to ever go down, So I think there's already standalone weekly value here if he becomes that Mostert role where he's kind of like the thunder to A-Chain's lightning, similar to what we saw in 2023. And there's also that, handcuff aspect of this where if A-Chain gets hurt, especially in PPR, Wright's going to be a league winner. So these are three running backs I would heavily advise to invest in this year. I think they're all great values. All these guys are going pretty much after like round 9 or 10. And And yeah, these are just, sleeper picks with upside, and that's what you want to fill your bench with, right? You want to fill your bench with guys that, are talented. They're going to be playing, already, right? But then there's the upside for them to actually step into a bigger role if the guy they're splitting with was to ever get hurt. So these are my recommendations to you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you next time.